Translated by Robert Southey. Book 2, Chapter 19. How when King Lisuarte was talking with his knights, how he would go against the island of the Boiling Lake to deliver King Arban of North Wales and Angriote of Estravaus, there came a damsel of the race of the giants from the sea, and demanded before the court that Amadis should do battle with Ardan Canileo, and if he conquered, the prisoners should be released and the island surrendered to the king. But if Ardan Canileo won the battle, he desired nothing more than to carry the head of Amadis to Madasima. Some few days after, as King Lisuarte was consulting with his knights about the passage which he would make to the Isle of Mongaza, to deliver King Arban of North Wales and Angriote of Estravaus, they saw a ship making toward the port, and went thither to see whom it brought. When they came near, a damsel and two squires were in the boat, and when they landed the damsel asked if King Lisuarte were there. They answered yes, but they were all astonished at her greatness, for there was not a knight in the court who equalled her by a full palm in stature, and her features and limbs were in proportion. She was fair enough and richly attired. Sir, said she to Lisuarte, I bring you a message which, if it please you, I would deliver before the queen. Be it so, said the king, and he returned to the palace, and the damsel with him. Then being in presence of the queen and of all the knights and ladies of the court, she asked if Amadis of Gaul were there, he who had called himself Beltenebros. He answered, Good damsel, I am he. She looked at him with an evil eye and said, You may well be he, but now it will be seen if you are as good as you are famous. Then she produced two letters with seals of gold. The one she gave the king, the other to the queen. They were letters of credence, and the king bade her say her bidding. Sir, quoth the damsel, Gromadaza, the giantess of the Boiling Lake, and the fair Madasima, and Ardan Canileo the Dreadful, who is with them for their defender, know that you design to come against their country, and as that cannot be attempted without great loss, they are willing to put it upon trial of a battle in this guise, that Ardan Canileo shall combat Amadis of Gaul. If he conquer or slay him, the land shall be free, and he shall be allowed to carry his head to the Boiling Lake. If he be conquered or slain himself, the land shall be yours, and King Ardan of North Wales and Angriote of Estravaus shall be delivered. They shall be brought hither, and if Amadis loves them, as they believe, and will fulfil the hope they have in him, he will accept the battle to deliver to such friends. If he be conquered, Ardan Canileo will still hold them prisoners, and if he will not accept the defiance, he shall presently see their heads cut off before him. Good damsel, quoth Amadis, if I accept the battle, how shall the king be certain that the terms will be accomplished? She answered, The fair Madasima, with 12 damsels of great birth, will put themselves as prisoners in the queen's power, in security that the terms shall be observed, otherwise they are content to lose their heads, and they demand no other assurance than that she may carry away your head if you be overcome. And moreover, the old giant Andanguel and his 2 sons will enter the king's prisons, and 9 knights beside, who have the towns and castles of the island in their keeping. Said Amadis, If this be done, the security is sufficient, but from me you shall have no answer unless you and your squires come and eat with me. Why do you invite us? Quoth she. This is no wisdom, your trouble will all be lost, for I hate you to death. Good damsel, said Amadis, I am sorry therefore, for I love you, and will show you all the honour that I can. If you desire to be answered you must grant this. I grant it, quoth she, more to get my answer than for any good will. Then said Amadis, Good damsel, to venture myself for two such friends, and to increase the dominions of the king is a just thing, and therefore I undertake the battle in the name of God. Let therefore those whom you have named come as hostages. Truly you have answered to my will, replied the damsel, but let the king promise that if you fail to perform your word, he will never protect you against the kindred of Famongomadan. That promise, quoth Amadis, may be excused. The king would have no one in his company who lacked truth. Now let us go eat, for it is time. I will go, and more joyfully than I expected. Tomorrow Madasima and her damsels will be here, and the knights will put themselves in the king's hands, for Ardan Canileo would have the battle without delay. But you must give him a safe conduct from all but Amadis, whose head he will take from hence. Don Bruneo of Bonamar answered, Lady damsel, sometimes it happens that he who thinks to take away another's head loses his own, and so it may fall out to Ardan Canileo. Amadis besought him to be silent, but the damsel replied to Bruneo, Who are you who speak for Amadis? A knight, quoth he, who would willingly bear a part in the battle if Ardan Canileo will bring a companion. She answered, You may be excused from that battle, but if you are desirous of combat, after that is finished I will produce a brother of mine to answer you, as much the mortal enemy of Amadis as you are his friend, and one who will prevent you from picking up the quarrel again. Good damsel, quoth Don Bruneo, your brother had need be, as you boast, to perform all that you have promised. See, here is my gage that I defy him. And he stretched out the end of his cloak towards the king. The damsel took a silver net from her head. Here, sir, you see mind that I will make good my words. The king took the pledges, though against his will, for he thought the combat of Amadis against Ardan Canileo enough to trouble him, for that enemy was so dreadful that for 4 years he had found no knight hardy enough to do battle against him. This being settled, Amadis took the damsel to his lodgings, which he ought not to have done, for the best castle in his father's lands, and to do her more honour he lodged her in the chamber where Gandalin kept his arms and accoutrements. She, looking round, saw the sword of Amadis, and seeing how strange a one it was, she told her 2 squires, and the others who were present, to leave her alone for a little while. When they were gone she drew the sword, and leaving the sheath and belt so that the theft might not be discovered, she wrapped it under her mantle. Then opening the door, she gave it secretly to one of her squires under his cloak, and bade him carry it to the vessel. This she spake softly, then spake aloud, Go bring me my cup. And all present thought that the squire was sent for that. Then Amadis and Branfil entered, and they made the damsel be seated on the estrado. And Amadis asked at what hour of the morrow Madasima would arrive. Before breakfast. But why ask you? Because we would go out to receive her, and show her every honour, that if she have received any displeasure from me, I may make her such amends as she shall demand. If you keep your promise, quoth she, and Ardan Canileo be what he hath been in arms, you will give her your head for amends. Any other amends will be good for little. That, said Amadis, I shall keep if I can, but if it could be I should gladly obtain her pardon. With that he went out, leaving Enil and others to attend her, but she was so desirous to be gone that the number of dishes provoked her, and as soon as the cloths were removed she rose and said to Enil, Knight, tell Amadis that I am gone, and that all the pains he has taken to please me are lost. God save me, quoth Enil, as I believe it, and whoever should strive to please such a one as you would lose his pains. She answered, you please me little, and he still less. Enil replied, neither he nor I, nor any one else, can like so insolent a damsel. With these words they parted. The damsel entered the ship glad for the sword which she had stolen, and she told Ardan Canileo and Madasima how she had sped. Ardan thanked her for what she had done, and he said to Madasima, my lady, account me not for a knight if I do not bring you back with honour. And if I give you not the head of Amadis in less time than a man can go half a league, how swift soever he be, never grant me your love. She answered him not, for albeit she greatly desired vengeance for the death of her father and her brother, yet for nothing in the world would she have seen herself married to Ardan Canileo, for she was fair and noble, and he foul and deformed and hideous, that there was none like him, and this agreement was made at her mother's will, not at her own, who had promised, if he would defend and revenge her, to give him Madasima, and leave him all her lands. Now, whereas this Ardan Canileo was a knight famous in the world, and of great prowess, the history shall tell you of what land he was native, and the fashion of his body and face, and what else to him appertaineth. Know then that he was born in the province called Canileo, of the blood of the giants, who abound there more than in other parts. He was not unreasonably great of body, albeit exceeding in stature any man who was not a giant. His limbs were large, and his breast broad, and his shoulders square, and his hands and legs proportioned. His face was large and flat, and like a dog, wherefore he was called Canileo, and his nose was flat and spreading, and his colour purple, freckled with black spots, which were all over his face and neck and hands. His look was fierce like a lion, and his lips were thick and curling out, and his hair so woolly that it could scarcely be combed, and the beard like it. He was now 35 years old, and for 10 years past neither knight nor giant had been able to withstand him, and so bony was he that there was scarcely a horse could carry his weight. When the insolent damsel heard him promise the head of Amadis to Madasima, she said to him, we may well hope so, sir, since fortune already shows herself adverse to your enemy. Here is his good sword which I bring you, which could not have been gained for you without great mystery of his ill fate, and your good fortune. Then she gave it him, and related how she had stolen it. He took it and replied, I thank thee for the gift, more for the good manner in which you took it, than for any fear I have of a battle against a single knight. Then he ordered tents to be taken from the ship, and pitched in a plain near the town, and there they all went with their horses and palfreys, and the arms of Ardan Canileo, expecting the next day to appear before King Lisuarte. Right joyful was Ardan that the combat was thus appointed, and for 2 reasons. The one because he made no doubt that he should carry off the head of Amadis, who being so famous all his glory would remain upon him, and the other because he should win the fair Madasima, whom he loved so well. Meantime Amadis was with his friends, who greatly feared this combat, so dangerous did they esteem it. Presently Agrayes and Don Florestan and Galvanes Lackland and Don Guilan the Pensive came in, knowing nothing of what had passed, for they had been hunting in the forest. But when they heard how the combat had been appointed, they complained that it had not been fixed for a greater number of knights, that they might have entered it. And he who most passionately lamented this was Don Guilan, who had heard how Ardan Canileo was the strongest of any knight in arms, and the most powerful, and it grieved him to death, for he thought that Amadis would never escape with life from him, fighting him man to man in lists. and he greatly wished to share his fortune if Ardan had brought a companion. Don Florestan too exclaimed in great anger, As God shall save me, brother, you think me of no account as a knight, for you do not love me, since you did not remember me on such an occasion. You make me perceive that it is bootless to accompany you longer, for you always withhold me from such perils. Agrayes also, and Don Galvanes, complained in the like manner. Sirs, quoth Amadis, you blame me with little cause. The combat was demanded of me alone, so that without showing cowardice I could not otherwise have answered. Else, if I might have had assistance, whom else should I have looked to but you, whose great valour might have aided mine in danger? Thus having excused himself, he said, It will be well that we ride forward to morrow before the king goes forth, to meet Madasima, who is greatly esteemed by all who know her. In the morning they apparelled themselves richly, and having heard mass, mounted on palfreys, and rode to receive Madasima. Don Bruneo of Bonamar went with them, and his brother Brandeville and Enil, who was a goodly knight and of great worth, and of cheerful heart, so that he was beloved and esteemed by all. So they were 8 companions. And as they drew nigh the tents they saw Madasima coming, and Ardan Canileo and their company. Madasima was arrayed in black, mourning for her father and brother, but her beauty was so lively and excellent that it was a marvel, and her damsels went near her all dressed in the same cloth. Ardan Canileo led her bridle, and there came the old giant and his sons, and the 9 knights who were to be hostages. As they drew near to each other, the knights made their obeisance, and she in like manner bowed to them with good semblance. Then Amadis approached her and said, Lady, if you are praised it is with great reason I see, and happy ought he to be esteemed who is allowed to honour and serve you. That would I willingly do, in what it might please you to command me. Ardan Canileo, who looked at him and saw how handsome he was, so that he had seen none like him, was nothing pleased at this. Knight, quoth he, give back, and dare not speak to one whom you know not. It is that we may know her and serve her, replied Amadis, that we are come. And who are you? cried Ardan scornfully. Let me know if you are worthy to serve her. Such as I am, quoth Amadis, I have the will to serve her, and shall not cease to have that will, however unworthy I may be. And since you ask who I am, tell me who you are. I am Ardan Canileo, who can better serve her in a day than you can in your whole life, though you were of twice your worth. That may well be, but your great service would not proceed from so good a heart as my trifling one. This is plain from your pride and evil mind. Know that I am Amadis of Gaul, of whom you have demanded battle. If I have offended and grieved that lady by doing that which without great shame I could not have left undone, right willingly would I atone for it by some good service. Ardan Canileo answered, If you dare perform your promise, certainly she shall receive atonement with your head, which I will give her. That amends, quoth Amadis, she shall not have with my good pleasure, but she shall receive a greater, for I will break off your marriage. No man can so lack judgment as to hold it good that your beauty and hers should be united. At this Madasima, being nothing displeased, laughed a little, and her damsels likewise, but Ardan became so wrath that his whole body shook, and his face became so exceeding terrible, that many thought Amadis was nothing in comparison with him, and that this would without doubt be his last battle, and the last day of his life. Thus they proceeded till they came before the king, to whom Ardan Canileo said, You see here the knights ready to become your hostages, if Amadis dare keep his word. Then Amadis came forth and answered, You see me here, let the battle be without delay, and I tell you that though I had not promised it, I would undertake it now solely to save Madasima from so monstrous a marriage. But let King Arban of North Wales and Angriote of Estravaus be brought here, that they may be delivered if I conquer. They shall come, replied Ardan, but let Madasima be where she may see the combat and the vengeance which I shall take for her. So the old giant and his sons, and the 9 knights put themselves in the king's power, and Madasima and the damsels went to the queen, and so meekly and decorously did Madasima demean herself, that albeit by her means Amadis was brought into this great danger, yet were they greatly pleased with her, and did her all honour. But Oriana and Mabilia, seeing the fierceness of Ardan Canileo, were greatly affrighted, and retired in great fear and weeping to their chamber, for they thought the strength of Amadis was not enough to resist that devil. Yet did they remember his good fortune, how often it had brought him off with honour, and Mabilia comforted her friend the best she could. The following day was appointed for the battle. King Lisuarte ordered his huntsmen and bowyers to surround the lists with chains and stakes, that neither knights might lose honour by the fault of his horse. The lists were before the palace, and when Oriana saw them preparing them from her window, the thought of how great a danger was there designed for her Amadis so overpowered her that she fell almost senseless in Mabilia's arms. Lisuarte went to the lodgings of Amadis, where many knights were with him, and said to him, that as the queen and his daughter and Queen Briolania and the other dames and damsels would pass that night in the chapel, beseeching God to preserve their knight, he would have him return in his company to the palace, and with him Florestan and Agrayes and Don Galvanes and Guilan and Enil, and that there they should regale themselves. And he desired Amadis to send his armour to the chapel, that he might arm himself tomorrow before the Virgin Mary, so that she and her glorious son might be his protectors. They went therefore with the king, and Amadis ordered Gandalin to carry his arms thither as Lisuarte had advised, but he, taking them in obedience, missed the sword from the scabbard, whereat so amazed was he, and exceeding sorrowful, that he wished himself dead, not only because the loss fell out at a time of such danger, but because he held it as a sign that his master's death was nigh at hand. He sought for it everywhere, and inquired of all who might know anything, but when he could learn no tidings he was on the point of throwing himself from a window, if the thought had not come upon him that in that case he should destroy his soul. Forthwith in trouble of heart he went to the palace, and calling Amadis apart said to him, Cut off my head, sir, for I am a traitor to you, and if you do not kill me I must slay myself. How now, quoth Amadis, are you mad, or what mishap is this? Better, sir, he said, that I were mad or dead, than that such a mishap should have befallen. I have lost your sword. It has been stolen from the scabbard. Is it for this you are so distressed? Replied Amadis. I thought something worse had chanced. Trouble yourself no more. There will be no want of another, wherewith God will assist me, if it be his good pleasure. But though he spake thus to comfort Gandalin, yet was he grieved at heart for the loss of that sword, as well for the lack of it now in such need, being one of the best in the world, as because he had won it by the force of his true love, and it was a comfort to him to look at it, and remember that when he was absent from his lady. Howbeit he bade Gandalin say nothing thereof to any person, but bring him the scabbard, and he bade him learn of the queen if he could have the sword which Don Guilan had brought there together with his own arms, and if he could see Oriana he made him request her in his name that she would be somewhere where he might see her when he was in the lists, for the sight of her would make him become conqueror in that or in a worse danger. Gandalin went to perform his bidding, and the queen commanded the sword should be given him, but Briolania and Olinda said to him, Ah Gandalin, what think you can your master do against that devil? He answered smiling, and with a cheerful countenance, Ladies, this is not the first perilous enterprise which he hath undertaken, and as God has hitherto preserved him, so he will now. God grant it, cried they. Then went he to Mabilia and told her what his master requested of Oriana, and then returned to Amadis and said that all things were done as he desired, whereat he had great pleasure and took more courage, knowing that his lady would be where he might see her from the lists. Amadis then took the king aside and said to him, Sir, I have lost my sword, and knew it not till now. They have stolen it and left the sheath. The king was grieved thereat, and answered him, Although I had determined and promised never to give my sword to any knight who was to fight man to man before me, yet will I now give it to you, remembering how many dangers you have encountered for my sake. God forbid, quoth Amadis, that I who ought to maintain your royal word should make you break it, and that too when you have pledged it before so many good men. The tears came into Lisuarte's eyes, and he said, Such a man are you for maintaining justice and right, but what will you do? I have here the sword which was laid in the ark with me, which Don Guilan brought hither. Herewith, and with your prayers to the Lord which will avail before him, I may be assisted. Then he placed the sword in the sheath, which became it well, although the sword was somewhat short, and the king was glad he took the sheath because of its virtue, which would protect him from exceeding heat or cold, for the bones of the serpents whereof it was made were of such a constellation. But of very different goodness was this sword from the other. Thus they passed that day till it was the hour of sleep, and then all those knights had their arms around the king's bed. But all that night Ardan Canelio had merrymaking in his tents, with music and dancing, and ever at the end of his song his people all cried out, Come morning come, and let the day be clear, that Ardan Canelio may perform what he has promised to the fair Madasima. But it fell out otherwise than they expected. That night Amadis slept in the king's chamber, but the sleep which he slept was of no avail, for presently at midnight he rose without speaking and went to the chapel, and having awakened the chaplain confessed all his sins to him, and there they both were before the altar of the Virgin Mary, making prayers, and beseeching her to be his patroness in this battle. When it was dawn, the king and those other knights arose, and heard mass, and Amadis was armed by such knights as well knew how to do it. But before his breastplate was put on, Mabilia came up and hung round his neck certain relics shrined with gold, saying that the queen her mother had sent them to her by the damsel of Denmark. But it was not so, for Elisena had given them to Amadis when she knew him for her son, and he gave them to Oriana when he delivered her from Arcalaus. When he was armed they brought him a goodly horse, which Corisanda had sent with other presents to her friend Florestan. Florestan carried his lance, and Don Guilan his shield, and Don Bruneo his helmet, and the king went before on a great horse, holding a wand in his hand. All the people of the court and town were assembled about the lists to see the battle, and the dames and damsels were at the windows, and the fair Oriana and Mabilia were at their chamber window, and with the queen were Briolania and Madasima and other princesses. As Amadis came up to the lists, they loosened one of the chains, and he entered and took his arms, and as he put on his helmet he looked at his lady, and felt therewith such strength as though no one in the world could withstand him. Then the judges entered the field, who were to assign to each his right. They were 3 in number, that good old man Don Grumedan, who was well skilled in such things, and Don Quadragante, who was now the king's vassal, and Brandoyuas. Then came Ardan Canileo, well armed, and upon a great horse. His harness was of thick mail, and his shield and helmet were of steel, so polished that it was bright like looking glass, and he had girded at his side the good sword of Amadis, which the damsel had stolen, and he bent his huge lance as if he would have broken it, and thus he entered the lists. When Oriana saw him, she said in great agony, Ah, my friend, how fierce and terribly my death approaches, unless God in his mercy prevent it. Leave this, quoth Mabilia, and make good cheer, for so shall you encourage your friend. Then Don Grumedan led Amadis to one end of the lists, and Brandoyuas placed Ardan Canileo at the other, with their horses' heads fronting each other, and Quadragante at an equal distance between them held a trumpet in his hand to sound the signal. Amadis, who was looking at his lady, exclaimed, What is Quadragante about that he does not blow the trumpet? Quadragante then blew the blast, and the 2 knights ran full speed, and encountered lance against shield so fiercely that the lances shivered, and they hurtled with such force that the horse of Ardan Canileo fell and broke his neck and died, and the horse of Amadis broke his shoulder and could not rise. Amadis presently arose, though with some difficulty, for a truncheon of the lance was sticking in his shield, and through the lappets of his armour, though it had not reached the flesh, he plucked it out, and laid hand to sword, and made at Ardan, who had risen hardly, and was adjusting his helmet. But Ardan seeing his approach drew his sword, and they joined battle so furiously that there was not a man who saw them but was greatly amazed, for their strokes fell so fierce and so fast that flames of fire seemed to proceed from their helmets and swords as if they burnt, and chiefly from the shield of Ardan Canileo, for that being of steel, and the blows of Amadis so rapid and heavy, it appeared as if the whole shield and arm were in a blaze of fire, but the great hardness of the shield protected him and saved his body, which was to the mortal evil of Amadis, for as his arms were not so good, and as Ardan had one of the best swords in the world, never blow reached him that did not pierce through and reach his flesh, so that in many parts the blood ran down, and his shield was all hacked. The sword of Amadis could make no impression upon the shield and helmet of his enemy, and though his own harness was of thick and strong mail, it was pierced in more than 10 places, and the blood streamed from them all. What then most profited Amadis was his activity, for by that he made Ardan miss all his heaviest blows, though Ardan was well practised and expert with the sword. Thus they continued till the hour of tierce, striking and foining, and grappling and struggling so manfully that Ardan Canileo was in great amazement, for he had never before found knight nor giant so strong as to resist him thus much, and what made him doubt the issue was, that he always found his antagonist more active and stronger than at the beginning, whereas he himself waxed weary and faint, being full of blood. Then Madasima knew that he had boasted vainly when he promised to conquer Amadis before the swiftest footman could run half a league, whereat she was little grieved, nor would she, though Ardan were to lose his own head there, for such was her mind, that she would rather lose all her lands than be joined in marriage with such as he. The knights still continued in battle, striking at each other in every part where they could work most harm, each striving for the other's death, and if Amadis had then had arms good as his own activity and breath, Ardan could not have held the field against him, but all his efforts were now needed, for his arms were broken, and his shield broken, and the blood flowing from many wounds, and he had to deal with a knight fierce and strong in battle. When Oriana saw him in such plight, her heart failed her for sore anguish, and she threw herself upon the ground, and beat her face, thinking that Amadis was come to his death. Mabilia seeing this, notwithstanding her own exceeding trouble, put on an appearance of much anger, and told her that at such a time and in such danger she ought not to forsake her lover, and because she could not endure to see his danger, Mabilia made her stand with her back to the window that Amadis might see her long hair. At this time Brandoyuas, who was one of the judges, said, I am grieved to see the arms and shield of Amadis so battered. And I, quoth Grumedan, am much troubled. Sirs, said Quadragante, I have proved Amadis in combat, and his strength seems to double while he fights, and of all knights whom I have seen, he endures the best, and is the best breathed. He is now in his full strength, which is not the case with Ardan. If any fault be in Amadis, it is that he is too eager. He should suffer his enemy to press on him, and then his own weight would weary Ardan, but his great courage will not let him thus spare himself. When Oriana and Mabilia heard these words, they were greatly comforted, but Amadis, who had seen his lady retire from the window, knew that it was for sorrow at beholding him, and he made a blow at Ardan with exceeding fury, and smote him so rudely upon the helmet that he brought him down upon one knee. But that blow was so mighty, and the helmet so hard, that the sword broke in 3 pieces, and a piece only remained in his hand. Then was Amadis in all fear of death, and they who beheld him expected his death also. When Ardan saw this he rose and drew back, and took his shield by the straps, and brandishing his sword, cried aloud to Amadis, Look, here is the good sword which thou hast won to thy own destruction. Look at it, this is it, and thou shalt die by it. Come, Lady Madasima, come to the window and you shall behold the full vengeance which I will give you. When Madasima heard this she fell at the queen's feet, and besought her to protect her from Ardan, which, said she, you may lawfully do, for Ardan promised to win the battle before a man could run half a league, and it has now lasted 4 hours. I hear you, replied Brisena, and will do what is just. But when Amadis saw in what plight he stood, his arms in pieces, and without a sword, he remembered the words of Urganda, when she told him that he would give half the world if it were his, so that that sword were sunk in a lake, and he looked toward Oriana's window, and seeing her back towards him, knew why she had turned away, and his courage revived, so that he resolved to die rather than fail to do his utmost. He made at Ardan Canileo as if he were about to strike him. Ardan raised his sword and awaited him, and struck at him as he came up, but Amadis bent aside and closed with him so close that Ardan could not interpose his sword, and he seized the shield by the rim, and plucked it with such force that he tore it from his arm, and well nigh brought him to the ground. Then he drew back, and put that shield upon his own arm, and took up the truncheon of a lance which had its point, and again turned to Ardan, being now defended by Ardan's shield. Ardan in great fury for this loss ran at him, thinking to smite him on the helmet. Amadis caught the blow upon his shield, and though it was of fine steel, such was the temper of that good sword that it pierced through the rim and entered 3 fingers depth, and with the broken lance Amadis wounded him in the right arm by the wrist, thrusting the iron half through between the 2 bones. Therewith Ardan lost all power to pluck the sword out, and Amadis forced it from his hand. If he was then right glad and satisfied, need neither be asked nor said. He cast away the broken lance, and drew the sword from the shield, thanking God for his mercy. Mabilia, who beheld, caught hold of Oriana, and made her turn and see her lover obtain this victory over so imminent a danger. Ardan Canileo grew faint as he beheld his death at hand, howbeit he attempted to recover the shield in the like manner as he had lost it, but Amadis smote him upon the left shoulder, and cut through armour and flesh and bone. Ardan felt the use of his arm was gone, and he fled round the lists, fearing that good sword. Amadis followed close and caught him by the helmet, and plucked it off, and brought him to the ground at his feet, then knelt upon him and cut off his head, to the great joy of all, especially of King Arban of North Wales and Angriote, who had endured great agony while they witnessed the danger of Amadis. Then Amadis cast the head out of the lists, and he dragged the body to a rock and threw it into the sea. Then he wiped the blood from his sword and placed it in its sheath. The king sent him a horse, on which he rode well accompanied to his lodging, but he was sore wounded and had lost much blood. With him he took King Arban and Angriote, whom he had delivered from their cruel chains. Brisena sent for her nephew Arban, and Angriote remained in the chamber of his true friend Amadis, and there were they both healed, and they were lovingly visited there by many knights and dames and damsels of the court, and his cousin Mabilia came to Amadis, and brought with her that true medicine wherewith his heart could heal all lesser evils. End of chapter 19.